I'm 79 years old, and I need to tell you something that might save you from wasting half your life like I did. For 50 years, I chased something that was never real, something that promised happiness but delivered nothing but emptiness. And the worst part, I knew better. Deep down, I always knew better, but I kept chasing it anyway. You see, I spent 5 decades of my life trying to get people to like me, to approve of me, to think I was worthy. I made decisions not based on what I wanted, but based on what I thought would make others happy. I said yes when I meant no. I smiled when I wanted to cry. I became someone I didn't even recognize, all in the desperate hope that someone would finally tell me I was enough. And here's the truth that took me 79 years to learn. That approval you're chasing, it's a mirage. You can run toward it your entire life, and the closer you think you get, the further away it moves. Because the problem isn't that people won't approve of you, the problem is that their approval will never be enough. But before I tell you how I figured this out, I need you to understand where this all started. Because maybe you'll see yourself in my story. Maybe you'll recognize the signs before it's too late. I was 8 years old when I first learned that love was conditional. My father was a stern man who believed children should be seen and not heard. My mother was gentle but overwhelmed, always trying to keep the peace. And I was the middle child, desperate for any kind of attention, good or bad. I remember the day it all clicked for me. I had brought home a drawing from school. I was so proud of it. I'd spent hours on it, making sure every crayon stroke was perfect. But when I showed it to my father, he barely glanced at it. "That's nice," he said, not looking up from his newspaper. "Now go wash up for dinner." But the next week, my older brother brought home a report card with all A's. Suddenly, my father was beaming. He called my mother over. He told my brother how proud he was. He even hung the report card on the refrigerator. And 8-year-old me learned a lesson that would haunt me for the next 50 years. Love wasn't free. It had to be earned. From that moment on, I became a performance artist. Everything I did was calculated to get that reaction, that approval, that moment of being seen. I studied harder, not because I loved learning, but because good grades got attention. I played sports I didn't enjoy because athletes were popular. I laughed at jokes that weren't funny because that's what people wanted. In high school, I discovered I could make people laugh. Finally, something that worked. If I could be the funny guy, the entertaining one, people would want me around, so I became the class clown. I memorized jokes, I practiced funny voices, I turned myself into a one-man entertainment system, all so people would smile when they saw me coming. College was more of the same. I chose my major, not based on my interests, but based on what sounded impressive. I joined clubs I didn't care about because they looked good on applications. I even changed the way I talked, adopting phrases and mannerisms that I thought made me seem more sophisticated. And it worked, sort of. People did like me. I was popular. I was invited to parties. I had friends, but here's what I didn't understand then. They didn't like me. They liked the version of me I was performing, and that version was exhausting to maintain. When I was 25, I met Sarah. She was smart, beautiful, and came from a family that everyone respected. Dating her felt like winning a prize, not because I loved her, though I convinced myself I did, but because being with her made me look good. Her approval of me meant I was worthy. So I became whatever I thought she wanted. She mentioned liking guys who were ambitious, so I worked 80-hour weeks. She said she appreciated men who were cultured, so I started going to museums and operas I found boring. She talked about wanting someone reliable, so I suppressed every spontaneous impulse I had. We got married 2 years later. The wedding was everything she wanted. I had no opinion on flowers or venues or music. I just wanted her to be happy because her happiness meant I was doing something right. The approval of her family, her friends, the way people looked at us like we were the perfect couple, it felt like validation. But marriage is where the performance really started to break down. You can't pretend 24 hours a day. Eventually, the real you starts to leak through, and when it did, Sarah would get this look. Disappointment. Like I wasn't living up to the promise I'd made, so I tried harder. I bought her expensive gifts we couldn't afford because her smile was worth the debt. I agreed to move to a neighborhood I hated because it was where she wanted to live. I took a job I despised because it paid more, and higher income meant I was providing better. For 30 years, I lived like this, constantly adjusting, constantly performing, constantly seeking that approval that would finally make me feel secure. And occasionally, I'd get it. Someone would compliment my work or praise my dedication or tell me what a good husband I was. And for a brief moment, I'd feel that rush. I'd think, this is it. This is what I've been working toward. But it never lasted, because approval is like a drug. You need more and more to get the same effect. And there's always someone who doesn't approve. Always someone who thinks you could be doing better, trying harder, being more. The breaking point came when I was 58. I was at my nephew's wedding, and I overheard Sarah talking to her sister. She was complaining about me. Not in a cruel way, just frustrated. She said I never seemed to have opinions about anything. That she felt like she was married to a yes man. That she sometimes wondered who I really was underneath all the agreeableness. I stood there in the bathroom stall listening to my wife describe me as a stranger to herself. And suddenly, the horrifying truth hit me. I had spent 30 years trying to be what she wanted, and she didn't even like the result. I had erased myself so completely that even I didn't know who I was anymore. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and I asked myself a question I hadn't asked in decades. What do I actually want? Not what would make Sarah happy, not what would impress my coworkers, not what would make my father proud, even though he'd been dead for 10 years. What did I want? And I couldn't answer. I had no idea. I was 58 years old, and I didn't know what I liked to eat, what kind of music moved me, what made me laugh when nobody was watching. I had become so focused on external validation that I'd lost touch with my own internal compass. The next 21 years have been about trying to find my way back to myself. It's been the hardest thing I've ever done, and also the most important, because here's what I discovered. The approval you're chasing isn't just pointless, it's destructive. It's not just that you won't get it, it's that getting it won't fix what you think it will fix. The problem with approval is that it's always external. It's always coming from outside of you, which means you're giving other people control over how you feel about yourself, and that's no way to live. I remember the first time I tried to say no to something I didn't want to do. It was such a small thing. Sarah wanted to go to her friend's dinner party on a Friday night. I was exhausted from work, and I just wanted to stay home. In the past, I would have said yes automatically. But something in me rebelled. I said, "Actually, I'm really tired. Would you mind going without me?" The look of shock on her face was like I'd spoken a foreign language. She asked if I was feeling okay. She couldn't understand why I wouldn't want to go. And honestly, neither could I. It felt foreign, like I was betraying some fundamental part of myself. But you know what happened? The world didn't end. Sarah went to the party. I stayed home, ordered pizza, and watched a baseball game. And for the first time in years, I felt something I'd forgotten existed. Relief. The relief of not having to perform, not having to be on, not having to worry about whether I was saying the right things or making the right impression. That was my first taste of what it felt like to choose myself. And it was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. The thing about living for approval is that it becomes a habit. Like any addiction, you don't realize how deep it goes until you try to stop. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to say what people want to hear. Every decision gets filtered through the question, what will people think? Every achievement only matters if someone else validates it. I started paying attention to how often I changed, my opinions based on who I was talking to. With my conservative neighbor, I'd nod along with his political views. With my liberal colleague, I'd agree with completely opposite positions. I was like a chameleon, constantly shifting colors to blend in with my environment. And the exhausting part? I'd convinced myself this was just being agreeable, being a good listener, being diplomatic. But really, I was being dishonest with others? Yes, but mostly with myself. The wake-up call came during a conversation with my son Michael. He was 35 at the time, going through a divorce, and he called me for advice. He was torn between fighting for his marriage and walking away. And as he talked, I found myself saying all the things I thought a good father should say. Be strong. Don't give up. Marriage takes work. But then he stopped me mid-sentence and said, Dad, what do you actually think? Not what you think I want to hear. What would you do if you were me? And I realized I had no idea. I'd spent so many years giving people the answers I thought they wanted that I'd lost touch with my own judgment. That conversation haunted me for weeks. My own son couldn't trust me to give him honest advice because he knew I was more concerned with saying the right thing than telling the truth. And he was right. I started an experiment after that. For 1 week, I decided to tell the truth about small things. When the waitress asked how my meal was, instead of automatically saying fine, I'd actually think about it. When colleagues asked my opinion in meetings, I'd pause and consider what I really thought instead of just agreeing with whoever spoke last. It was harder than I expected. I'd catch myself mid-sentence, about to say what I thought people wanted to hear and have to course correct. Sometimes I'd fail and revert to my old patterns, but slowly something started to shift. People started responding to me differently. Not worse, like I'd feared, but better. When I expressed genuine opinions, conversations became more interesting. When I admitted I didn't know something instead of pretending I did, people respected my honesty. When I said no to things I didn't want to do, people didn't get angry. They just found someone else. The biggest revelation was this: most people weren't paying as much attention to me as I thought they were. The approval I was desperately seeking, the judgment I was terrified of, it existed mostly in my own mind. People were too busy worrying about their own lives to spend much time analyzing mine. But the hardest part wasn't changing how I acted. It was dealing with the voice in my head that screamed every time I chose authenticity over approval. That voice had been my companion for 50 years. It knew exactly what to say to get me back in line. They won't like you if you're difficult. You're being selfish. Who do you think you are? You're going to end up alone. For decades, that voice had protected me from rejection by ensuring I never gave anyone a reason to reject me. But protection and living aren't the same thing. That voice had kept me safe, but it had also kept me from ever discovering who I really was. The process of unlearning 50 years of people-pleasing wasn't smooth. There were setbacks, moments when I reverted to old patterns because they felt safer, times when I'd disagree with someone and spend the whole night replaying the conversation, worrying I'd said the wrong thing. Sarah and I went to counseling during this period. She didn't understand what was happening to me. The man she'd married, predictable, accommodating, safe, was becoming someone she didn't recognize. And honestly, I didn't recognize myself either. It was like meeting a stranger who'd been living inside me all along. The counselor asked us both a question that changed everything. She said, "Can you love someone you don't actually know?" Sarah looked confused, but I understood immediately. How could Sarah love me when I'd never shown her who I really was? How could I feel truly loved when the person being loved was just a performance? That's when I realized the cruelest irony of seeking approval. In my desperate attempt to be lovable, I'd made myself impossible to love. Because love, real love, requires knowing the person you're loving. And I'd spent 50 years making sure nobody, including myself, knew who that person was. The journey back to myself has taken 21 years, and it's still ongoing. Some days I catch myself slipping into old patterns. The urge to seek approval doesn't just disappear after half a century, but now I recognize it for what it is, a habit, not a necessity. I've learned to ask myself different questions. Instead of, what will people think, I ask, what do I think? Instead of, how can I make them happy? I ask, what would make me feel authentic? Instead of, am I being good enough? I ask, am I being true enough? The relationships in my life have changed. Some people, those who were only interested in the accommodating version of me, drifted away. Others deepened as they got to know the real person underneath the performance. New people entered my life who were drawn to authenticity rather than agreeableness. Sarah and I are still married, but our relationship had to be rebuilt from the ground up. It turned out that underneath all my people-pleasing and underneath her frustration with my lack of authenticity, we actually liked each other. The real versions of ourselves, not the roles we'd been playing for 30 years. But here's what nobody tells you about approval addiction. The withdrawal symptoms are real. When you stop seeking constant validation, you feel exposed in a way that's almost unbearable. It's like walking outside naked. Every decision becomes a risk. Every opinion you express could be the one that makes people reject you. I remember the first time I disagreed with my boss in a meeting. It was about a project direction I thought was wrong. The old me would have nodded along and complained privately later, but I spoke up. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. I felt like I was about to be fired on the spot. You know what happened? We had a productive discussion. He listened to my concerns. We found a better solution. And afterward, he told me he appreciated my honesty. The catastrophe I'd imagined never materialized. That's the thing about approval addiction. It's based on imaginary threats. We create elaborate scenarios in our minds about what will happen if we don't get approval. But most of those scenarios never come true. People are generally more understanding and less judgmental than we assume they'll be. The hardest part was learning to sit with disapproval when it did happen, because it does happen. When you start being authentic, some people won't like it. They'll express disappointment. They'll try to guilt you back into your old patterns. They'll make comments about how you've changed and not in a good way. My mother-in-law was particularly difficult during this transition. She'd always appreciated how I deferred to Sarah in everything. When I started expressing my own preferences, she saw it as me becoming difficult. She'd make little comments about how marriage was about compromise, how husbands should put their wives first, how she didn't understand young people these days. The old me would have immediately backed down, apologized, tried to win her approval back. But I realized something important. Her approval came at the cost of my self-respect, and that price was too high. It took me years to understand that some people's disapproval is actually a sign you're doing something right. If your authenticity threatens someone, it's usually because they're uncomfortable with their own lack of authenticity. Your honesty holds up a mirror they don't want to look into. The guilt was the hardest emotion to navigate. When you've spent 50 years believing that your job is to make everyone else happy, choosing yourself feels selfish. I'd lie awake at night second-guessing decisions, wondering if I was becoming a bad person. But slowly, I started to see the difference between selfishness and self-respect. Selfishness is hurting others to benefit yourself. Self-respect is refusing to hurt yourself to benefit others. One is destructive, the other is necessary. I learned to pay attention to how I felt after interactions with people. When I was authentic, even if the conversation was difficult, I felt energized. When I performed and people pleased, even if the interaction went smoothly, I felt drained. My body was giving me information about what was healthy and what wasn't. The physical effects of approval seeking are real, but rarely discussed. For 50 years, I carried tension in my shoulders from constantly trying to read people's reactions. My stomach was always slightly clenched, ready for disappointment or criticism. I had headaches from overthinking every conversation, analyzing every facial expression for signs of approval or disapproval. When I started living authentically, those physical symptoms began to fade. It was like my body was finally allowed to relax after holding its breath for half a century. But perhaps the most surprising discovery was how much energy I'd been wasting. The mental gymnastics required to constantly adjust yourself to what you think others want is exhausting. When I stopped doing that, I suddenly had bandwidth for things I'd forgotten I enjoyed. I started reading books for pleasure instead of because they seemed impressive. I took up woodworking because I liked working with my hands, not because it would impress anyone. I discovered I actually enjoyed cooking when I wasn't worried about whether my meals were good enough. These weren't earth-shattering revelations. They were simple preferences and interests that had been buried under decades of performing, but rediscovering them felt like meeting old friends I'd lost touch with. The relationship with my son Michael changed dramatically once I stopped trying to be the perfect father and started being a real person. We began having actual conversations instead of me just dispensing the advice I thought he wanted to hear. He started calling more often, not because he needed something, but because he enjoyed talking to me. One day he told me something that brought tears to my eyes. He said, "Dad, I like you better now. You're more interesting when you're just yourself." I realized that in trying to be what I thought was a good father, I'd actually been robbing my children of knowing their real father. My daughter noticed the change, too. We'd always had a cordial relationship, but it had been surface level. When I started expressing genuine opinions and interests, she began sharing more of herself with me. We discovered we had similar senses of humor, similar taste in music, similar ways of looking at the world. These connections had been there all along, but my constant people-pleasing had obscured them. The professional realm was another area where authenticity changed everything. I'd spent my career trying to be whatever I thought each boss wanted me to be, the agreeable employee, the dedicated worker, the team player, but I'd never brought my actual skills and perspectives to the table. When I started speaking up in meetings, offering genuine ideas instead of just supporting others, something interesting happened. People began coming to me for advice. My opinions carried more weight because they knew I wasn't just telling them what they wanted to hear. I got promoted twice in my 60s, not because I was working harder or trying to impress anyone, but because I was finally contributing my authentic value instead of just trying to blend in. But the professional changes weren't always smooth. There were colleagues who preferred the old, accommodating version of me. Some relationships became strained when I stopped automatically saying yes to every request for help. I had to learn that not everyone would appreciate my journey toward authenticity, and that was okay. The financial implications surprised me too. When you're constantly seeking approval, you make expensive choices to impress people. The house in the right neighborhood, the car that looks successful, the clothes that send the right message. When I stopped caring about those external markers, I discovered I needed much less to be happy. We downsized our house not because we had to, but because maintaining a showpiece was exhausting. I bought clothes I actually liked instead of clothes I thought made me look professional. I stopped going to restaurants I didn't enjoy just because they were trendy. This wasn't about becoming cheap or careless about appearance. It was about making choices based on my own values instead of what I thought would impress others. And the relief of that shift was immense. The social implications were complex. Some friendships revealed themselves to be based entirely on my willingness to go along with whatever the group wanted. When I started expressing preferences or declining activities I didn't enjoy, those relationships faded naturally. But other friendships deepened. People who had always sensed there was more to me than my agreeable surface began engaging with the real person underneath. I discovered I was capable of much more interesting conversations when I wasn't constantly monitoring myself for signs of disapproval. I joined a book club in my 70s, something I never would have done before because I was afraid my opinions about literature wouldn't be sophisticated enough. But I found I had genuine insights to offer, perspectives that came from my own life experience rather than what I thought sounded smart. The dating advice I'd give to younger people changed completely. Instead of trying to become what you think someone else wants, focus on discovering and expressing who you really are. The right person will be attracted to your authenticity. The wrong person will be attracted to your performance, which means they're not actually attracted to you at all. I watch young people today and I see myself at their age. So worried about saying the right thing, wearing the right clothes, having the right opinions, so afraid of being judged that they're judging themselves more harshly than anyone else ever would. The social media generation faces an amplified version of what I went through. Instead of seeking approval from family, friends, and colleagues, they're seeking it from strangers on the internet. The performance has become even more elaborate, even more exhausting, but the solution remains the same. You have to decide that your own opinion of yourself matters more than anyone else's opinion of you. You have to choose authenticity, even when it's uncomfortable. You have to risk disapproval to find real connection. The irony is that the approval you get for being authentic is so much more satisfying than the approval you get for performing. When someone appreciates the real you, it actually means something. When someone appreciates your performance, it's hollow, because you know they don't really know you. At 79, I can tell you that authenticity is not a destination you arrive at, it's a practice you commit to daily. Some days, I still catch myself about to say what I think someone wants to hear instead of what I actually think. The difference now is that I notice it happening and can course correct. The voice that used to scream warnings about being too honest, too opinionated, too much myself has quieted to a whisper. It's still there, but it no longer runs my life. I've learned to thank it for trying to protect me and then make my own choices anyway. The most profound change has been in my relationship with failure. For 50 years, failure meant I wasn't good enough, wasn't worthy of approval. Every mistake felt like evidence that I was fundamentally flawed, so I played it safe. I avoided risks. I chose paths that were guaranteed to get positive reactions rather than paths that might lead to growth. But when you stop living for approval, failure becomes something entirely different. It becomes information, data about what works and what doesn't. Feedback about which direction to go next. It stops being a judgment of your worth and starts being a teacher. I remember the first time I tried something I might fail at after my transformation. I was 63 and decided I wanted to learn to paint. Not because it would impress anyone, but because something about putting color on canvas appealed to me. I signed up for a beginner's class at the community center. My first painting was terrible. Objectively awful. The proportions were wrong, the colors muddy, the composition chaotic. The old me would have been mortified, would have quit immediately to avoid further embarrassment. But something different happened. I looked at that horrible painting and felt curious. What could I do better next time? That curiosity changed everything. When you're not afraid of disapproval, you can experiment. You can try things that might not work. You can be bad at something while you're learning to be good at it. And that freedom to be imperfect is where real growth happens. I kept painting for 10 years, never got particularly good at it, but that wasn't the point. The point was that I was doing something purely for my own enjoyment, without any consideration for what others might think. And that felt revolutionary. The ripple effects of authenticity surprised me. When you stop performing for others, you give them permission to stop performing for you. Sarah began sharing thoughts and feelings she'd kept hidden for years. My children started being more honest about their struggles instead of trying to present perfect lives. Friends began having real conversations instead of surface-level pleasantries. It was like I'd been living in a world of mirrors, where everyone was reflecting back what they thought others wanted to see. When I stopped holding up my mirror, other people felt safe to put theirs down too, and suddenly we were all looking at real people instead of reflections. But this journey also revealed how many relationships in my life had been built on false foundations. When you remove people-pleasing from the equation, some connections simply evaporate. They were never really about mutual appreciation or shared interests. They were about my willingness to be whoever the other person needed me to be. This was painful to discover, but ultimately liberating. I'd rather have 5 genuine friends than 50 superficial ones. I'd rather be truly known by a few people than falsely admired by many. Quality over quantity isn't just a nice saying. It's a fundamental truth about human connection. The health benefits of authenticity are rarely discussed but incredibly significant. Chronic people-pleasing is a form of chronic stress. Your nervous system is constantly activated, always scanning for threats to your acceptability. Your body never gets to rest because your mind never stops performing. When I stopped seeking approval, my sleep improved. My digestion got better. Even my blood pressure went down. My doctor couldn't explain it medically, but I knew exactly what had changed. I was finally living in alignment with who I actually was instead of fighting against it every day. The spiritual dimension of this journey caught me off guard. I'd never been particularly religious, but discovering my authentic self felt like a religious experience. There was something sacred about finally meeting the person I'd been all along, underneath the performance. I started understanding why so many wisdom traditions talk about the importance of knowing yourself. You can't love others authentically if you don't know who you are. You can't make genuine contributions to the world if you're constantly shape-shifting to please everyone around you. The regret I feel isn't about the time I lost, though that saddens me. The regret is about all the relationships that could have been deeper, all the experiences I missed because I was too afraid to be myself, all the contributions I could have made if I trusted my own voice earlier. I'm 79 years old now, and I'm running out of time to share this message, but if you take nothing else from my story, take this. The approval you're chasing is a prison of your own making. Stop performing for people who don't even know the real you. Start small. Say no to one thing you don't want to do. Express one genuine opinion. Take one risk on being yourself. Because the life you're waiting to live after you get enough approval, that life is happening right now, while you're busy pretending to be someone else. Don't waste 50 years like I did. Be yourself today.